that's one of the reasons why Jordan Peterson is so incredible. It's not a bad thing for men to have somebody that they can look to in order to improve themselves.
We really find our true place in this world when we carve out something separate from the other sex. We find a true comfort in this world when we realize that there is a need for us as a man. There is a need for us to go out and do something.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Pinedo Brothers Podcast. I'm your host, Peter, and I have with me my brother.
Hey, I'm JP.
And we're back. It's good to be back and good to be talking. We've been through many adventures since we last been together, but I'm glad that you're here joining and listening to us. Again, we are the Pinedo Brothers, filmmaking brothers. We're working to revitalize the world of Catholic art through stories about faith, not just faith films. So today we're talking about something that's very near and dear to me, and I would guess to my brother as well, and that is manhood and masculinity. There's a lot of talk these days, and I think we have. It's definitely the new thing where everyone is very fixated, I think, on womanhood and kind of woman empowerment, the idea of being this fixation on the woman, which, a woman, of course, is 50% of the human population and extremely important. But in my opinion, we should not be completely preoccupied with women. There's a place and a time for conversations about masculinity and authentic manhood. And we want to really understand what that is and what it means and if it's important and why it's important. And even if men have a place in modern society, I don't know, maybe men are outdated. We don't need them anymore. Who knows? That's what we want to talk about here on the Pinedo Brothers Podcast. So to get things started, though, when you hear the word man, I want to know what our audiences think of. When you think of a man, do you think of something more like Maximus from Gladiator? Are we thinking more something like this guy? Put aside the fact this is Ryan Gosling, because everyone kind of likes Ryan Gosling, but this is apparently, I didn't even know that this was a thing that was happening, a movie about Barbies. So do we have the Maximus version of manhood in our mind, or do we have the Barbie doll version of manhood in our minds? And I would very strongly argue that modern society definitely has the Barbie idea of manhood in their mind, which I think is not only a detriment to men, but a detriment to women and our entire society as a whole. I think that this is an extremely important topic because it affects everybody. If we have bad ideas of womanhood, that's going to affect men, it's going to affect society. If we have bad ideas about men, that's going to affect all of society as well. And I think that a lot of the problems that we have today come from the Barbie version of manhood. So before we go any further, you look like you have some thoughts there, JP. What are you thinking?
Well, I love the joke of the Barbie version of men, the Ken doll version, the neutered version, the Barbie plaything version of man with the great six pack and doesn't have anything else to bring besides that and a great head of hair. But what does that mean when you're saying it? I know, jokes aside, when you say the Barbie version of man, what do we? Let's dive down and what does that mean?
Yeah. So I think today we have what I really see as a complete rejection of what I believe true manhood is and true masculinity. And maybe there is a reason for that. Obviously, there have been a lot of bad men throughout the years who have done a ton of damage. And so from a certain perspective, you can kind of understand people being frustrated or hurt by men because men, like women, are human and they fail and they do harmful things. Ourselves included, of course. But I think that society believes that manhood is something that is basically something that is of antiquity, something that is not needed anymore and is now harmful. From my understanding, when you look at society, and especially even like our school system, the male traits are extremely pushed aside, extremely, and male behavior is very much seen as a negative thing. This sense of aggression is seen as something that needs to be completely stamped out and completely, like you were saying, neutered. And I don't think that's good. I think there's a good form of aggression. I think a good form, a healthy form of aggression is a positive thing. And aggression is a male trait. Not saying there aren't aggressive women, because obviously there are, but the idea of, even just the idea of virtue comes from this idea of a man of action, doing what he believes is right, and putting those beliefs into action. I think that idea is now completely rejected and to the detriment of our society.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. It's important to try to define, without using the word male, what masculinity is, because I think it would be a little circular if we say masculinity. So define what male traits or masculinity is in your mind. I think we can both kind of blend the conversation. And then maybe we can kind of carefully delineate what some common misconceptions are that we see in modernity. So, yeah, you already mentioned some traits. You mentioned aggression. You mentioned kind of I guess aggression and violence kind of piggyback on each other. But I think it'd be interesting to differentiate them for a little bit later, maybe. But tell me a little bit more about, how do you define masculinity?
Well, of course, I think there's the biological perspective of what a man is and physically. But also, I've been having these conversations. I've been having these conversations with a few friends, and I think that something that I've realized about men is that something very inherent in man's nature, I think, is being a builder. And that building, that idea and that desire to build is kind of shown in pretty much almost all the men I know, and not just through like physical, like hands and like building with your hands, but also through building and making something of your life or of your work. So many like business owners, people who, and throughout history, men who build empires and kingdoms and nations are the founding fathers. I think that in something about manhood is that innate sense to build. And that also transfers in relation to woman, because in the family, which is of course the building block of our entire society, the man is the person who builds the foundation for that family to exist. I think that, of course, if you disagree, this is something that we can discuss, the recurring ideas. But the woman is the one. I think the woman is the person who makes the family a family, but the man is the person who lays down the foundation and the building blocks in order for the woman to make that family a family. That's kind of how I see it. And so I think that, to me, if you like really boil down the essence of what masculinity is in terms of character and what makes man kind of have that manly spirit, I would tie that very closely into that idea of being a builder.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. What you said kind of reminds me of some of our viewers might remember old Father Paul Donlin, who was a guest on our show a couple times now. And he told me something before Michelle and I got married, and it went something like this, although he told it much more eloquently. Michelle's calling is to is to focus on the now, focus on what is going on at this moment in time, and what needs to be done. It's an eminently practical calling. And I think I'm going to differentiate between you mentioned earlier, there's a biological aspect of masculinity, but I think I'm going to just leave that be. I'm not going to just define biology so much. I'm going to define male traits, male personality, kind of what is common in most men's character, especially if we're going to go for the ideal, because we're describing ideals that we're striving for really here. And then we're also making generalities. So this is useful for us to categorize and understand our world, especially as we work in relations with others. So if we're going back to what Father Paul said, if we understand woman as the female trait is kind of an eternal now, like focusing on what's happening at this moment in time, my masculinity is listening to what she has to say about the now, giving the present its due credence, but then also thinking about what is going to happen in the future, taking the now and looking forward into it. And in order to look forward, you need to build. There needs to be something built to withstand the might of the future. Without it, if you don't have a house built, your future is going to be very short and brutal, and and everything will be over quite quickly. And so I think a little bit, if we're looking at masculine traits, your builder aspect is exactly right, because you build with the thought for the future. Peterson often says, sacrifice the now for what's to come. And that's not just simply a masculine idea, but there's a reason why so many men flock to this calling that Peterson has, like sacrifice the now for build something what's coming to the future, because that's very much ingrained in the male character. Most men, and as you can see how most men flock to Peterson's teaching and talks and things like that. And not just men, my wife loves Peterson as well. But most men want to leave their mark on the now. They see something and they want to carve their place into this edifice that's facing them. They see the world around them as some sort of construct, and we don't have a place until we've carved our name into this great construct that's constantly evolving in front of us. And in carving our place to it, we're in carving our place into the now, into this world that we're facing. We build for the future. Something that I often see with men that's different from women, and I think it's helpful to define masculinity as opposed to femininity, because we make such great foils for ourselves. As opposed to females or the feminine temperament, we often can get lost in some sort of vision of what could happen or what could be built, sometimes to the detriment of the now. And my wife is very good at like saying, oh, no, you got to pay attention right now. Our son needs you, or we need this. This is something that you need to let go for now. But men often, like I remember I was listening to Matt Walsh recently, maybe not recently, it was probably a few months ago. And he spoke about some woman that wrote into, I think it was a newspaper or something. It was like a Dear Diary sort of thing. Like, I have a problem, help me solve it. And the woman said that her husband would just go out after work and dig. And he was just digging a hole. And he had built quite an impressive hole. Like, he had supports and, he had like lights inside the tunnel, and it was just going deeper and more. Like, it was tunneling, basically the whole tunnel to China sort of idea. And he was doing it. And she was really concerned. He was like, he doesn't do anything else besides work. And, he spends time with me when I ask him to, but he seems to really just enjoy digging. And I don't know what to do about that. And Matt Walsh had a great point. He said, just let him dig. Sometimes men just need to dig. So sometimes the things that we're building might make zero sense to everyone else around us, and sometimes maybe they don't make sense at all. Maybe that hole really didn't make sense. But it seems like men have this strange ability to, at the expense of all else, focus on something. And that something might turn out to be world changing because we spent so much time on it and it seemed to make no sense to anyone else around us. but you're like, well, no, this is important. Let's keep working at this. And lo and behold, things, it was worth it. You strike gold in the end. I think about Edison turning on the light bulb. He found hundreds of thousands of ways to do it wrong before he found it the right way. So that's kind of some of the things I think about. What are some of your reactions to that, though?
I mean, I think that you see masculinity just completely rejected today. And it's very much harmful, I think. Because without true femininity and without true masculinity, we don't have the ingredients for success. And obviously that affects us all. That really is a detriment to us all. But I think that the type of, if you want to call it, like we've spoken about the modern heresy before, the modern heresy that we have today, I think that masculinity is under special attack. And that is something I think that's important to be aware of, because you have to realize that you're being attacked in order to respond to it, in order to fight back. And I think that realizing that is a wonderful gift, especially for men, because we do have it in our natures to fight and to fight back, to defend what we know to be true, to be good and to be beautiful. And so understanding that masculinity is something that is inherently good. I see it as an inherent good. And definitely not something to be rejected. But when you have this neutered society, obviously you don't have authentic femininity. But I think that in a special way, you have an especially destroyed version of masculinity today under this modern heresy. And obviously we see people, or today people are saying, oh, there's no difference between the genders, they're exactly the same. And obviously that's not true. But I think
we also have the opposite, though. At the same time, there's that. You can in one breath say there's no difference between the sexes, and then you can also say there is such a huge difference between the sexes that we immediately need to, without any questions asked, chop off genitals, because this person is a woman, or this person is a man, and they just have a woman's body or a man's body, or vice versa. Things must be chopped off. Hormones must be given, because there's such a huge difference. So we have both at the same time, and they're both destructive.
Yeah, absolutely. But to my point, I think that saying here that the neutering of men, like that modern idea of that there is no place for men in society, is having and will continue to have disastrous consequences until more people realize it and are able to respond and attack that idea. And I think that's why I want what you were saying earlier. That's one of the reasons why Jordan Peterson is so incredible. Because I remember, seeing that interview with him where they were saying, like, well, what do you think about, how so many young men are flocking to this idea and to what you're talking about? And they're like, do you feel guilty about that? And he's like, wait, why am I supposed to feel guilty about this? Like, why is that a bad thing? Why is it bad that my message is resounding with young men, especially? If they are seeing my message of self-improvement, and how is that harmful? Like, it's not a bad thing for men to have somebody that they can look to in order to improve themselves. And I think that is indicative of our entire culture. We have many things and many messages of woman empowerment, which, the right type of empowerment is always good. Like, there's a bad type of manly empowerment where it's not true empowerment, and it's the same thing with women. There's a type of supposed empowerment for women that's not actually empowerment. But at least that's a topic of conversation that is normal and expected to be had today. It's not unusual, and I think in our modern society to talk about to be praising ideas that empower women, and that in many ways, that's a really good thing. But it's super unusual and weird for us to be talking about ideas that empower men and that lift up men and challenge them to be something and to make something of themselves. And it's gotten to the point where it's not only weird or unusual, but it's, as this interviewer was telling Jordan Peterson, that's something to be ashamed of. Like, if men are looking at you and connecting with you and wanting to improve themselves, or they're flocking to you, that is seen as a negative thing, which it's really hard to understand why that is, unless it's something that it's designed at really destroying our culture. It's a self-destructive tendency to reject this idea of manhood and this idea of aggression, this idea of building. Because there is, in my belief, there are good and proper ways to exercise those manly traits. And we're not called as men to hide them or to neuter ourselves or to make ourselves more like men. We are, in many ways, I would say, called to be, if you can excuse the term, savage, because we're designed to be strong. We are called to be strong. And this idea that we're called to be basically just taller versions of women, I completely reject, and I think is extremely it's insulting to both men and to women. Like, a man's not supposed to be a woman. It's not supposed to act or be just a taller woman. He's supposed to be a man. And it's insulting to both genders. And so honestly, it's an idea it's very just deeply troubling, insulting, and something that I would love to see more men reject.
Well, we are rejecting it. I think it's suicidal to have that type of ideation. It leads to death ultimately. And it's heartbreaking because those that reject it the most are the ones that do commit suicide, they're also the ones that go shoot up the schools that have that sort of rejection. But it's a rejection of all things, not just that idea. But I think that rejection of all things is often birthed in young men through that insistence on the culture that those aspects which make us different from women are not good. They ought to be rejected. Those aspects, that's kind of more savage aspects. And those play into our desire to be a protector. We just like we want to build things, we also want to protect those around us. I just finished reading the Once and Future King by T.H. White. And in that book, King Arthur, it's a book about King Arthur. King Arthur comes up with an idea for chivalry. He comes up with an idea for Knights of the Round Table. And what they are tasked to do is go out and protect the weak. And this is a very exciting prospect. And the book makes it kind of think like it's something that Arthur invented. But I suspect that it's been around. There's a reason why Arthur has become a myth. Because the idea of man to protect the weaker around him, to use that which has been gifted to us that makes us different, is something that's very appealing to all men at all times, not just King Arthur times and not just times now. We want to go out and defend, even with even violently if need be. And that's why I think a lot of times people could say, well, if women were in charge, there would be no war. I don't know about that. I think that there would still be war. It would just look a lot different.
A lot of people throughout history, I will say that.
What's that?
Women have poisoned a lot of people throughout history.
That's a good point. Yeah. That's a good point. I think a perfect example of that is people always point to good Queen Bess, Queen Elizabeth, and King Philip. Philip ruled over a much larger empire, and his executions, they both had executions, just like we have executions now. his executions, I think, were 1/10 of the executions that good Queen Bess had. Historically, that idea really falls apart when you're talking about if women were in charge, there would be no war and no violence. So it's not like women aren't violent, but there is a real desire for men to turn the violent aspects of our nature, which we share with women, maybe to a greater degree have than women, into protectors for our, like, why is it that revenge tales are always so interesting to us? Like we love stories about Gladiator or Braveheart or
The Patriot. It's another.
Yeah, exactly. All of those. We are just fixated by this idea of the avenging protector. And really it's the man has the failing, and it's through his own sins oftentimes, or his lack of ability, that he's not able to protect his family. And so he's trying to recompense for that. We love those type of stories, and they're built upon archetypes, which is why they're timeless and they continue to last and attract future generations. So we really have we really find our true place in this world when we carve out something separate from the other sex. We find a true comfort in this world when we realize that there is a need for us as a man. There is a need for us to go out and do something. And when we're called to go out and do something that a woman can't do, or that a woman doesn't want to do, one of the two, there's a real appeal in that. We want to do something singular. There, like I said, we have that innate desire to carve out our own place and our own name in the edifice of time. So I think that we really find comfort in defining ourselves as separate from a woman. And I think the women could do the same, although that or would be the same, but maybe that's a different conversation.
Well, I mean, I that's another idea that I really reject, is this idea that if women ran, the world, we wouldn't have these wars. The idea that I reject there is, who says that women haven't been running the world? Like, who says that women have been pushed aside? Like, that's a very, I think, a misunderstanding of history and the relationship between men and women. Because I don't see true masculinity as something that pushes down woman or womanhood, or this idea of empowered, good femininity. I don't see true femininity as something that pushes aside or diminishes manhood. I think that the more fully empowered both of the sexes as they are, the more that they can flourish and the more that they build off of each other. And so I think that whenever you have a really strong, like the strongest men throughout history have, very often had very strong women there beside them. And it's together that they're able to build so much and to make beautiful things happen. And so I really reject this idea of one pushing aside the other or stomping out the other, because without each other are incapable of existing. And this modern heresy is, like what we said so many times, it denies nature and it denies the existence of natural reality. And it tries to convince us, and I think it has convinced us as a culture, that womanhood and manhood are opposed to each other in a way that they cannot coexist in and be empowered. And that's just not true. They are opposed to each other in that they are different, in that they see the world very differently, but it's only when they work together and in their different ways that I think that you have a very strong, flourishing society.
You're right. You're absolutely right. I think there's that common bad movie trope, which I really can't stand, the battle of the sexes idea. And it's kind of built upon this modern idea of everything needs to be split 50-50. You know, like I carry it halfway, you carry it the other half, and that's equality. And so when you're keeping score like that, then it becomes a battle. It becomes a game that you're constantly trying to win and one up the other person. I'm not quite sure where that came from, but you see that. I think if you look at movies, like we love looking at movies, you kind of see a gradual slippage. Nothing ever falls completely all at once. It's always by degrees. First, you would find an attack on fatherhood. In the 70s, you started seeing kind of the anti-father, the father that would just sit in the armchair and be grouchy, the Archie Bunker type of father. Well, really around that same time, you do start to see the war between the sexes, where there's no longer the cooperative nature between man and wife, and it's more of a battle that's won or lost over a long period of time, with many mini battles that are fought along the way. And then you start to see the attack really on motherhood, where motherhood is seen more as a burden, and it's seen as not the norm for women to stay and be a mother. But then that's a new idea for a woman to stay and be a mother. I don't know. I'm musing about it. I think we're always trying to adapt to a new surrounding. We do our best to find commonality through the thread of time, to come up with solutions to problems that are presented to us. And the old solutions don't seem to really work oftentimes. Just like it doesn't seem to really work to say, well, a woman's place is at home. When, traditionally a woman's place, the woman and man were both out there tilling the ground together. It wasn't like the woman was slaving over the stove all day, which is, a common trope we often see. So you see there gradually in film kind of an attack on motherhood. And now I think we're at a point where we've attacked masculinity itself. Like the idea of man as something that is dangerous is bad. Peterson points out so well. Before him, C.S. Lewis, Aslan in C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia is a good lion, but it doesn't mean that he's not dangerous. In fact, he's one of the most dangerous people out there. It's not safe to be next to Aslan. And he's really the prototypical male because he's Jesus. Just as Jesus is our prototypical male in the story of the Chronicles of Narnia, Aslan was that prototypical man embodied as a lion. Men are not supposed to be safe. When we're living out our true calling, a little dangerous to be around. And that is a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that the idea of not being safe, if you want to pull up that picture of Maximus again, like you look at this guy and he is not, he's not a gentle person. You look at that face, there's like blood on him, and he's wearing, all this armor, and he's grizzled looking. This is a man, this is somebody who is not safe to be around. If you cross him, you will get hurt.
Something I love about it is that he's kind of ugly. You're not supposed to be pretty. If you're a man's man, you don't look anything like that. You are supposed to be kind of gnarly looking. Mm. And I love that stereotype of being gnarly looking.
But the point here being, is that the not being safe is a good thing, in that, like, I am capable of protecting what I need to protect. And I am willing to take action, whether that is through some kind of diplomatic solution, having the willingness and aggression to go to your boss and say, like, this is something that's wrong, it's affecting my family. I want and I need this to happen. Having that ability to be aggressive in that way. Or if it's something where somebody is threatening your family or attacking your family, having that ability and willingness to be a man of action and to not be a safe, like, Ken Barbie doll. But instead being a Maximus, where you're like, yeah, if you cross him, he's not a pushover, and he will do something to fight back. He's not going to lie down and let you walk all over him and his family. And so that's really what I see, what you're saying there about that idea of not being safe, where it's not a negative thing for a woman. It's a very positive thing for a woman to be able to see a man and know that he's not going to let himself or you get walked all over. I don't think that is. I would like to ask, pose the question to viewers. Like, you look at those two men right there, and which one are you more comfortable with? Which one would you rather have at your side? The grizzled, ugly Maximus, or the pretty Ken doll who, is just there to look good?
He's about as much of an accessory as Barbie's purse.
Pretty much. So, I mean, obviously, I think we're running a little bit out of time right here, but this is an important conversation to be had. And I think that, like you were saying, slowly, I think more people are coming to realize this, the toxicity of not having masculinity. Because we talk a lot in society about toxic masculinity, which obviously there is a form of masculinity that is toxic. But what's more toxic is a society without masculinity, because it is important for our society to have that. And without it, I do think that you get a lot of the problems that we have today, like since 1973, since the beginning of Roe v. Wade, over 60 million dead innocent American children. And I think that, and to me, I see that directly related to the rejection of masculinity and what our role as men and as protectors is meant to be. We have the degradation of the family and of manhood, and immediately you get something like abortion, where we're not protecting our most innocent and smallest human beings. We're allowing them to be slaughtered by the millions each passing year and decade. So I guess this is a call to action, to be men of action, and to reject that which tells you masculinity and manhood is something to be pushed aside and to be hidden and to be ashamed of. Like that, a reporter wanted Jordan Peterson to be ashamed of calling men to action and being men, true men.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's our call to action? Like, what are things, how can we live out masculinity in our day to day?
Well, I think that you and I, we always we're almost always hearkening to Jordan Peterson. And I think it really starts off with that idea of clean your room, take ownership of your life. You put order to what you see as disorder. And that you start with yourself and bettering yourself, and that eventually you grow, and that transfers out to society, and to those around you, to your sphere. To not be afraid to don't feel like you have to be like a timid person second guessing everything and second guessing your instincts for what you know to be right. There is a place for aggression, like we were saying, and that's not you going and pushing people aside and like stomping on people. That's standing up for the people who are being stomped on, and we need that. It's extremely important.
Absolutely. I would like to step outside of some of the great advice that Peterson says and speak a little bit in the capacity as this is a Catholic podcast. We're Catholic artists, and we're speaking to primarily a Catholic audience, although we hope that others enjoy what we have to say. If you're a Catholic and you are not being nourished, especially as a man, I think women have a unique ability to find nourishment anywhere in the church. But if you're at your parish and you're not being nourished, don't keep going there. There's too many good priests out there, and there's too many good Catholic parishes out there. that challenge their men, and they have a real place for men in their church, and they have a need for men to step up, and they're constantly calling for that. I would be willing to bet that within driving distance, there's probably a parish around you that has a need for a real man just like you. So I would encourage any listeners to seek out that good parish. There might not be someone around. I mean, not everyone is as blessed as Peter and I are to have so many good parishes around us. But you do find your place in the world when you're surrounded by like-minded people. And I've been around quite a few lukewarm churches in my day. And it's emasculating to have, oh, everything's okay. Everyone's basically all right. Just love Jesus. And it's good to have the message to love Jesus. But a man needs something a little bit more. I think we need to be really challenged. And there are priests out there that challenge. In Los Angeles, I loved my pastor. He challenged us every Sunday. He challenged us. And our pastor here in Houston does the same thing. So I think if you forge out and you're not satisfied with mediocrity, that's a very masculine trait, because we kind of have a disagreeable nature, and we're going to be the ones that say, you know what, this is not good enough. And you might have to be a little mean about it. Niceness is not the best category. I don't think any man really likes being nice. I certainly hated being called nice, especially when I was a younger man. I hated it. It implies too many different things, like softness or femininity. And maybe that's offensive to some listeners, but if you're not being nourished, don't be nice about it and just keep on hanging on. There's other options out there. What do you make of that, though, Pete?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a place for kindness.
Kindness is not niceness.
Yeah, there's a difference between kindness and niceness, and nice should never be what you are. You shouldn't be so nice that it's at the expense of you standing up. You can't let yourself be walked all over, or those that you love be walked all over. That goes back to that aggression, where something is wrong, it has to be put right. You can't just stand idly by and let it go. So I think that's a wonderful thing. Like, don't be satisfied with mediocrity, especially if something as important as your church, because if you feel that it's that you're not being challenged to dive deeper into your relationship with God and into your faith, then that is something that eventually just goes off by the wayside. And,
that's right.
And so it's this idea of being, I think, this very masculine idea that you've seen throughout history of being a forger of roads, and a pioneer. It's the Romans who built the great highway systems that connected the entire civilized world, so that their armies could travel and sustain the empire. And then the explorers who traveled through oceans that they believed were full of sea monsters. They traveled into these dangerous waters to go find new lands. It's this spirit of adventure and this spirit of courage and going into the unknown. It can be scary, but it is an idea that we are all too often reject today. And so don't be satisfied. Like what you were saying, don't be satisfied with the mediocrity. Be a man and go and make something of yourself.
Sounds like a good place to end it.
Yes, sir. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this episode. And until next time, we're the Pinedo Brothers, Catholic filmmakers working to revitalize the world of Catholic art through stories about faith, faith films. And we'll hope you join us next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Pinedo Brothers Podcast, an artist podcast for Catholics. We hope you enjoyed it, and if so, please consider subscribing, and commenting below. That really helps. This episode was edited and recorded by me, JP. Makeup was done by no one, if you couldn't tell. The Pinedo Brothers are Catholic filmmaking brothers working to revitalize the world of Catholic art through film. For more information on us, check us out at pinedobrothers.com. Thanks again.